I want to talk a little bit about body composition because I know that a lot of women, especially as they reach sort of late perimenopause and into and into the menopausal transition, we lose estrogen, of course. It goes down to about 1% of, what it once was. There is a steady decline, certainly in testosterone. And then a lot of women will notice, so with this hormonal decline, they will notice sarcopenia. So if they're not being strategic and they're not strength training, and even if they are strength training, we can see loss of muscle. A lot of women will complain about this. We'll say waist, like their waist is disappearing, this like thickening of the waist, this like increase in visceral adiposity, or this increase in adipose tissue that's located kind of ectopically through the belly, which is not typically where women tend to store fat. We typically, under the influence of estrogen, store it in the lower half of our body. So it's like, thighs, butt, whatever. And then when we're in menopause, of course, that fat distribution changes, even though someone might be following a good diet and strength training. So, what are some of the peptides that we might consider that can help with those, we'll call them unfavorable body composition changes? And how do we know how to choose? How do we know what peptides and when? And actually, I have to come back to make sure I come back to the cycle question, because I want to come back. You mentioned it briefly, but I want to come back to it. How do we know like where to start? Like which is the one that we start with? And then of course, maybe this is a conversation about GLP-1s here as well, because certainly as we get older, even though we don't necessarily realize it, we are becoming more sedentary, right? So we just are sitting more often. So the caloric intake might be the same, the caloric output might not be there. And then you layer on top of that hormonal derangement, we can just say, that is menopause, can be catastrophic and devastating for a lot of women. So talk to us about how we can think about using peptides as a way to augment or to improve our body composition, both from an adipose tissue perspective and a muscle preservation perspective.
Yeah, so off the bat, out of the gate, there is no peptide that you can take that is going to be like a DHEA or a progesterone cream or something like that. These things are going to be more powerful, and I'm more inclined, if it's a hormonal issue, to lean on the nutraceutical ingredients like wild yams, or you can even use, if there's too much estrogen, if there's not enough cortisol, it really depends on what the pattern looks like. There's a lot of nutraceuticals and even pharmaceuticals that can certainly help women during menopause better than peptides. However, the weight gain, let's just be real. If you gain some weight and you're not liking the way you look, you're very strongly going to consider a GLP-1. That's like, you can't even turn the TV on without being advertised by it. So let's look at GLP-1s. The three types are the single agonist, so Ozempic. The second one is a dual agonist, which is tirzepatide, and there's retatrutide, which is a triple agonist. You can get the first two relatively easy now, and the third one you can also find from online vendors for now, until the big pharma take that away from them too. But essentially these ones are going to shut down appetite. If you are taking them, you will lose weight. It's pretty easy to do so when you just don't have any food cravings and you have really impaired, I should say, by design, but slowed gastric emptying and slowed motility. You feel fuller for longer. It also basically shuts off your hunger signal if you do it too strongly. I'd strongly suggest people listen to Dr. Tina Moore, your podcast with her, or her own podcast on microdosing GLP-1s. I believe that is the best way to do them if you're going to do them, rather than going in and doing the full high dose at the start. You'll, get fast results, but it'll come at a consequence. And the consequences of taking the GLP-1s are that slowed motility very commonly leads to bacterial overgrowths in the gut. Because the food is taking so much longer to pass through, the bacteria that ferment the food that you've consumed are going to start fermenting higher and higher up in the small intestines, rather than being quite low down in the large colon. So when you end up with bacterial overgrowths, that kind of throws a big spanner in the works for your metabolic and your overall health. You'll end up with leaky gut. That's a big problem for people who do take GLP-1s, and that's why you might see a lot of bloating and stomach distension. It's a very annoying side effect of, yes, I've lost weight, but now I'm bloated and I can't digest things anymore properly. So that's a big consequence of that. When women are going through menopause, the adrenals are under tremendously more stress because of the ovaries essentially not tapping out completely, but they're putting the burden now on the adrenal glands. So supporting the adrenals with natural desiccated adrenal glandular is really beneficial, I believe. I don't know if you focus on the adrenal part a lot, Stephanie, or you more focus on, all right, let's support estrogen with like an estrogenic or phytoestrogen to sort of supplement, with a plant base that's going to have similar effects. Things like soy can be beneficial. I would normally not recommend people have soy unless they're in that point, unless they have really low estrogen.
Yeah.
I'll derail myself a little bit and say when the estrogen drops in women, that's when they're incredibly likely to get connective tissue injuries too, like bodybuilders personally.
100%.
But
Yeah.
bodybuilders who go on estrogen blockers end up tearing a muscle or having a connective tissue injury because they've blocked and tanked their estrogen levels. Their joints become, the lubrication of the joints drops. They end up look like Skeletor. The skin deplumps and has, you can see basically the bone in their face. So definitely supporting estrogen during that time and making sure that, nutraceutically, you could take things that naturally support estrogen levels. But I could say short term, there's definitely things like DHEA creams or progesterone, not progesterone creams, but there's other things that you can take that can support you during that. As far as peptides go, there's nothing that will help your estrogen or your progesterone levels, just frankly putting it that way, but supporting your connective tissue so you can get away with the loss of estrogen without getting an injury or if you're in the gym like you should be doing the strength training, you don't want to end up with an injury that can put you on your butt for 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the severity of it. So having a BPC or a TB500 peptide or TB4, which is another one that's probably equal to, if not better than BPC for musculoskeletal and connective tissue repair. It's often combined with BPC is the TB4, and they call that the Wolverine stack. So those ones during that time period is like your insurance against injury. I'm not saying it can't happen. When estrogen's low, you're really in a vulnerable position, so don't go for PRs on squats or deadlifts. But definitely maintain that strength training and take things to support the joint health and muscle health during it.
Back to this discussion around like microdosing versus standardized dose of, whether it's a single, double, triple agonist, whether we are looking at, GLP-1s, et cetera. Where do you land, or what is your understanding of the evidence? And maybe you can even draw from clinical practice as well, if that's relevant, in terms of what is better for the patient. Like I tend to be like first do no harm, low and slow, typically better. Like you actually gain more momentum from going low and slow than like, hard and fast typically. And you can extend that to many, many areas of life. Like you can extend that into fitness, right? If you go all like balls to the wall and you're doing like 7 days a week in the gym, like the next week you're not gonna be able to walk and you're gonna hate it. You're not gonna go back. I'd rather you go 2 days. So talk to me a little bit about maybe your philosophy around microdosing versus like some of the standardized dosing that is currently available for patients.
Yeah, I really like this discussion. It is one that I've had a few times before, and I always analogize it like I would TRT. There's always the right dose for each person. If you were to take exogenous steroids in a bioidentical level, then you're going to get all of the benefits of having high testosterone, just the same as if you were to take a microdose of GLP-1s, you might get all of the benefits of having, all the signaling of GLP, the weight loss without the side effects. There is a sweet spot to doing these. The mainstream dosing that you get from a doctor who's not well versed in it, I believe for most people is too high. I believe you will lose weight faster than if you did it microdosed. However, it will come at the side effect of that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth issue, which then leads to the leaky gut, which also, again, like if you're just simply not eating and you don't have any appetite, I don't believe that's healthy either. You should have some, but like a reduced appetite, because you still are going to need your micronutrients, and your macronutrients need to absorb properly too. So it's like, kind of like if I was a bodybuilder and I did the highest amount of testosterone, I'm going to gain the most amount of muscle. Just like if I did the highest amount of a GLP-1, I'm going to lose a heck of a lot of weight in a short amount of time. Asterisks at a huge side effect. The other thing that I spoke about when I was on Tina's podcast is when you are losing weight fast, that can really overtax your burden, because your fat is a storage organ for toxins. And when you liberate them really fast, your liver can become very overburdened. And those toxins, if you are no longer having fat if you no longer have fat on you, will store, well, they'll either be dumped into your gut or reabsorbed or store in fatty organs. And you can actually have a lot bigger issue on your plate.
Brain.
If
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
toxins in your brain, that's going to absolutely nuke your ability to think and be coherent in your thoughts. But I'm not going to fearmonger here, but I really feel like detox is so important because the breast tissue is fatty tissue, and you look at how much breast cancer is out there. If you have a huge amount of fat that you're losing, all the metals, all of the endocrine disrupting things that your body has stored in the fat to protect you are now liberated and can store there, or they store in your brain, or if you're a man and the prostate's pretty fatty too. There's a lot of challenge that the modern life has presented us with toxins, and fat is the solution to them. The short term sort of, we'll put it in the cupboard and worry about it later solution.
Let me just encapsulate it to protect the rest of the body from it. And I think that there's almost like a knock-on effect where it becomes this vicious cycle. Well, it's like, okay, we're just going to sequester the toxin in the fat here, but we're going to, as we are exposed to more and more toxins, we're going to create more and more fat to be able to sequester so that we can protect the rest of the body from it. So I think that that's also potentially at play too in midlife, where you have this, you've had 40 or 50 years to accumulate, to be exposed to all the things, like, not to get on my diamond encrusted conspiracy tinfoil hat on, but like all the chemtrails and all the, the schedules and all the things, right? And like the environment and the lawn fertilizer. And I think there was just a report that came out a couple months ago now. People who lived near golf courses had a much higher incidence of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease because of the spray, like because the lawns are, of course, so pristine on golf courses because they're constantly being sprayed for weeds. Meanwhile, my my mother-in-law is like, oh, dandelions, and she'll pick them and she makes them into a tea. So different cultural maybe. I would say, and this is just like a love to my ex Greek mother-in-law who I just adore. Like, she loves dandelions. Like, and it's a taunt, and of course maybe you can speak to dandelions as a naturopathic physician as well. But it's a diuretic, and it's wonderful as a blood, wonderful as a tonic for the blood, etc. So we in North America tend to look at dandelions as these disgusting things that we would never want on our front lawn, and then you go to Greece and Italy, and they're like, oh my God, we're gonna have tea with this. So it's interesting to see culturally how we sort of view, quote unquote weeds, right?
Yeah. One final closing statement to that is the Ozempic face that people talk about. I believe strongly, like if I'm not, when I'm heavily detoxifying, when I lived in Malden, I was pulling it out doing sauna and HOCAT, and I had Ozempic face without having taken Ozempic, and that was because of the toxin burden, really dark circles under the eyes and really gaunt in the face and just looked like crap. And respectfully to myself, I looked like shit. So that is what's happening to a lot of people when they have not done anything right their whole life and then just jump on a Ozempic, tirzepatide or retatrutide, lose the weight fast, and then they look really unhealthy in the face. I think we probably all know someone who's done that, or a friend of mine who lost weight really fast, who was on intermittent fasting, keto diet, but not saunaing, not detoxifying, also looked like that. So that's a really important caveat, that detoxification pathways, NAC, glycine, what else, glutathione, and then binders as well to catch it once your body's removed it, are so important for people on a GLP-1 journey or even irrespective of GLP-1s. People who are losing weight fast and have never detoxified need to focus on that, because you might be just pushing the problem down the road.
Right. Well said.